Hello there everyone and welcome back to the GSL-English Podcast. My name is Gideon and this is a podcast for all learners of English to practice and improve in a relaxed and natural way. And in this episode, we are going to talk about the differences between Northern and Southern English. We're going to look at what those differences are, but also we're going to dive into the reasons as to why there are differences in the first place. Why do we sometimes use different vocabulary? Why, are the pronunciation differences so strong between Northern and Southern English? So this is an interesting episode. And in a moment, I'll talk about why we're discussing this, which has come from a recent trip that my wife and I took. And of course, along the way, we'll learn some new vocabulary and have a good old catch up. So before we get into it, I hope you're doing well. I hope you've had a good week wherever you are in the world, whatever you have been doing. I do have an apology at this time. I'm very sorry that there wasn't a podcast last week. So if you are a regular viewer or listener and you went to turn on the podcast or listen to the podcast at 10 o'clock, get it right, Gideon, 10 o'clock last Sunday, and there wasn't an episode, I am eternally sorry for that. I hope you can forgive me. And the reason was basically we had friends and family visiting, and I had planned to record a podcast, but I ran out of time, and I could have squeezed it in during the week, but I thought, you know what, I just want to enjoy time here with friends that we had visiting from America, and of course just wanted to enjoy some time with family. So I had to put the podcast on the back burner, which basically means you just don't think about it for a while, you'll come back to it. So I do apologize that there wasn't an episode last week, and I did put a little post out on the community page on YouTube, and I must say your responses were so lovely. You really are a lovely bunch. You were like, don't worry about it, have a great time with your friends and family. So I do appreciate your understanding. We did have a lovely time with our friends from America. So it was their first time in London. So they'd not visited England actually at all before. They were doing like a big European trip. So we showed them all the tourist spots in London. We did the walk to Buckingham Palace, down St James's Park, showed them Big Ben, which is not actually Big Ben. I think I've spoken about this a few times in the podcast, but what you see is not Big Ben. Big Ben is the name of the bell inside the tower. If you do know the name of the actual tower, let me know in the comments. Let me know. If you know the actual name of the tower that holds the bell, which is Big Ben, let me know in the comments. So we did that. We had nice food. Went to a superb restaurant called Flatiron Steakhouse. So if you like your steaks and you're in London, make sure you check it out. And then we had the absolute privilege of going to see the West End show Lion King in the evening. Oh, it was so good. Absolutely fantastic. It's so visceral. It's so alive. So if you've seen Lion King, the show, you'll know exactly what I mean. But I'm not going to give any spoilers for those that haven't seen it. But if you get a chance to watch the musical Lion King in London, make sure you do. It is phenomenal. And I've also just realised, looking on YouTube, that the plant is not here. That is downstairs. I don't know why it's downstairs, but it is. So for you regular viewers on YouTube, you know that I normally have a plant here, but I have forgot to bring it upstairs. So I do apologise that there's no plant. We've spoken about that plant a lot recently. It's doing well. It's still alive, believe it or not, but it's not here. But anyway, that's why there was no podcast last week. So yes, I hope you've had a good week. I hope you managed without me. I know you must have missed me. I know it must have been tough, but I hope you got through it. Yeah. Okay. So why are we talking about this? Why are we talking about Northern and Southern English today? Well, my wife and I, for different family reasons this week, had to travel up north. So we actually had to go to Blackpool. So from London to Blackpool is generally about 5.5 hours. So with a stop or two, a break, it's about 6.5 hours. Blackpool is past Manchester. So you're going up north, you get to Manchester, and then you go on to Blackpool. It's on the coast, quite famous for its light shows and things like that. So we went up to Blackpool. It's not my favourite place in England, but it was nice. And then we spent some time with family there, as I say, for different reasons. And then we came back down, spent a day in Manchester. And then yesterday, we did the drive back down here to Kent, about 20 minutes from the centre of London. And whilst we were there, I just noticed so many differences between Northern English and Southern English. And I thought, you know what? Let's talk about that on the podcast. Let's just have a nice chilled chat about Northern and Southern English, because there were some expressions, something said, and I thought, what on earth does that mean? Now, just as a note here, my wife is from Manchester. So she is from the north of England and does speak with a northern accent. I think it's reduced a little bit since she's been down here, and I have to be honest, I love it. I love my wife's accent. I love the northern accent. So as we go through this, just keep in mind that neither is right or wrong. Okay, it's just the differences between it. And I thought, you know what? Let's dive into the reasons as to why we have different accents here in England for what is quite a small island compared to others. Why do we have that? And look at some of the differences. So that's what we're going to start with. We're going to start with just this idea of why do we have different accents? And it all starts with history. So to answer this, we have to go way back in time. We're going to go way, way back to a time when England has really been invaded and settled by many different groups of people. So to be invaded, means to be attacked by an enemy group. And then once they've settled, it means that they've attacked, they have invaded, and now they have settled, meaning that they plan to stay. And this has happened many times throughout the history of England over the centuries. And each of those invading groups, of course, brought their own languages, which in turn mixed with local speech. And because they settled, because they stayed, that generally changed the way people spoke across England. So what I did, I prepared a rough timeline in history. Now, this is very basic, great project. If you're looking just to look into history of England, have a look into this yourself. It is really interesting. But here's just a rough timeline of what happened. Now, I am no historian. I fact-checked this as much as I could. So if anything's incorrect, I do apologise, but I think it's all good. I think it's all correct, but I'm just an English teacher. I'm not a historian, all right? So the Romans came around 43 AD, and of course they spoke Latin. Then the Anglo-Saxons arrived around the 5th century, and their Germanic language is now a big part of modern English. The Vikings came from Scandinavia around the 8th century, bringing Norse words and sounds. Then in 1066, the Normans invaded, of course, from France, and French had this huge influence over the English language for hundreds of years. And we still see that in today. We use thousands of French words in the English language. So depending on where in the country, knocks my microphone there, depending on where in the country you lived, you were influenced by different groups, by different ones that invaded and settled in England. And that really influenced the way you spoke. For example, in the north, the Viking influence was a lot stronger. So that Scandinavian and a lot more of that Germanic root. In the south, there was much more of a Norman, a French influence. And this is really the reason as to why, or a big reason as to why, accents developed so differently in regions. So geography played a big part in it. Depending on what part of England you were in, played a big part because it depended who invaded, who had settled. And of course, going back to a time where this was before cars, before trains, before the internet, people really didn't travel far unless they were kind of battling or had money or for different reasons, it was very rare that people would leave the village or town. That is where they live, that is where they died. That is what happened. It's kind of like this very isolated way of life. And this meant that local ways of speaking, including pronunciation, the rhythm and the flow of the way you spoke, and vocabulary, it stayed in place for generations because people weren't really moving. People weren't really travelling around the country. So over time, these speech patterns, these pronunciations, this rhythm, this vocabulary that of course was influenced from different parts of the world, they became distinct regional accents. And that is where we kind of see the boundaries today. For example, people in Newcastle developed what is called the Geordie accent. In Liverpool, you get the Scouse accent. In Manchester, there's the Mancunian accent. And in the southeast, you'll hear the Estuary or the London accent. And of course, within these, there's many more. But it just gives you an idea of how many accents we do have here in England. And each of these accents sounds different because the people there were influenced by different cultures. And they didn't really mix with those other areas until fairly recently in history. So it gave time for those accents, those ways of speaking, those dialects to really kind of ingrain into the communities, into the places that they were living. And as time went on, social class and identity, either correctly or incorrectly, became a massive part of the way that you spoke. So accents over time, it wasn't just about geography. It wasn't just about where you lived. A big part of it was identity and class. And by class, we mean the class that you lived in, your social class. And in England, the way you speak can often tell others a lot about your background, like where you're from, what kind of job your family had. I'm not saying this is right by any means. It's kind of like a way of judging someone. But if we, for example, if we take received pronunciation, the RP accent, that's the one that everyone goes on about really, always known as the Queen's English, or we might call it BBC English, the very proper way of speaking. This has kind of been associated with education, with upper class society. It was the accent, of private schools, universities, and formal media. So we often, we associate that received pronunciation perhaps with that upper class of society, of course, being in London, being in that hub. That's where it came from. And often in the BBC, you hear news reporters and things like that, particularly going back, they had this received pronunciation accent. Now more so, which is fantastic. We're getting more accents brought into everyday media. But on the other hand, regional accents, perhaps more of those northern accents, were seen more as local or perhaps working class, working hard, that kind of society. But today, that truly is changing for the better. Many people are proud of their regional accent. If you talk in a northern accent, it by no means qualifies you as uneducated, qualifies you as working class. That does not stand at all anymore, which is absolutely fantastic. And in fact, now many accents are celebrated in the media. You'll see it. You'll hear presenters and actors with all sorts of accents on TV and radio in the UK. But of course, going back in history, that received pronunciation was what was seen as perhaps educated and proper. You spoke the Queen's English, but now that kind of stigma has gone, which is absolutely fantastic. So what are some of the pronunciation differences? Well, one of the biggest differences I hear, and that I think you will also hear, is to do with the R sound and the A sound. So in Southern English, we have this long R. For example, bath, grass. We'll just take those two examples. Okay, bath and grass. Got that long R sound. But with Northern English, that becomes more like an A. It's a short A, like math, bath, grass, bus. We have that southern, often we say bus, like I'm going to take the bus to work. But in Northern, very often it becomes bus, bus, bus. And it's just those subtle differences that you hear, but it makes a massive difference to the accent and to the dialect. So even though the words are the same, the pronunciation changes depending, on where you are. So the meaning's there, but the pronunciation does change. So, I'm gonna take a bath. Northern English. Southern English, I'm going to take a bath. Bath. But what does this mean? What does this mean going forward for English learners? Should we worry about what accent we learn? Does it matter if we have a bit of a northern accent? Does it mean that we shouldn't listen to teachers with a northern accent or a southern accent? Not at all. Don't stress about copying a British accent. I would choose a way of speaking that you most like. That could even be American English, whatever it is. I would choose a way of speaking that most appeals to you. But the most important thing comes down to communication, doesn't it? So you want to focus on clear pronunciation. You want to focus on clearly communicating, but also learn to understand different accents. Of course, in England, we have so many different fantastic accents. But wouldn't it be a shame if we think, right, I'm only going to listen to something which is RP, which is received pronunciation? Well, then you're missing out on this kind of beautiful complexity of the English language. So, take in different accents, Northern, Southern, Midlands, Cornish, whatever. All of these different accents are what make the English language so great. So neither is right or wrong. And sometimes we joke about it, like my wife and I will have a joke together about the way you say a word, whether it's right, whether it's wrong. But the reality is it doesn't matter. As long, if anything, it makes it more endearing. It makes the English language much more enjoyable. But it doesn't truly matter. Neither is right or wrong. But it's definitely something to enjoy. It's a part of the accent that we can enjoy together. So some vocabulary differences that I learnt along the way. We stopped off in a hotel, and at this hotel we had breakfast. Okay, and they said to me, would you like a sausage barm or a bacon barm in the morning? I looked at my wife and I said, what on earth is a barm? I have no idea what that means, a barm. Any guesses? It's a roll or a bread roll. So a barm, bread roll, sausage barm, bacon barm, ham barm. That's the Northern English for bread roll or a sandwich kind of thing. Dinner in Northern English can mean midday meal, but for us here in the south of England, it can mean lunch. An evening meal in Northern English they call tea. What time do you want tea? Or tea, what time do you want tea? That kind of thing. For us, that is dinner. That is supper. This is a new one for me. It's a bit more of an older difference, but if you have like an alley between two houses, you're going to walk down the alley. In Northern English, they might call that a ginnel. A ginnel, whereas we would call it an alley or an alleyway. And I've noticed that the kind of the biggest thing the difference that I notice with Northern English is there's a lot more kind of rhythm to it, and a lot more kind of, it's almost musical, and that's why I do like listening to it. It's a lot more rhythm, kind of a bit more flow to it, a bit more musical. Very good. So there you go. That's just some of the differences between Northern and Southern English. But it is interesting, isn't it? When you think about the differences, when you think about, how small England is, but we do seem to have so many different accents, different dialects, different pronunciation. Where does it all truly come from? So it's a good thing to look into. So I came across this beautiful poem about, I think it was called England's Voices, and it talks about the different accents here in England. So what we're going to do is we're going to read this poem in its entirety. We're going to read it in its entirety first, and then we're going to break down each stanza and then see what we can learn from it. So it's a really lovely poem. Enjoy. From Cornish cliffs to Geordie shores, a symphony of English roars, 100 tongues, 1,000 ways. In every accent, history stays. The lilt of Devon, soft and low, where rolling hills and rivers flow. The clipped tones of the London town, where modern life is bustling down. A Yorkshire burr, a sturdy sound, on fields of green forever bound. The Scottish Highlands, wild and free, with Gaelic echoes, wild and glee. But some would judge, would cast aside, the voices shaped by where they hide. A common tongue, a posh facade, when all are equal, none are flawed. For in each accent, stories hide, of ancestors, where they did abide, a heritage, a cultural art, a piece of England held to heart. So listen close, with open ear, to every voice, both far and near. For in these sounds a nation lies, reflected in its varied skies. So that's a really beautiful poem. So let's take that first stanza. From Cornish cliffs to Geordie shores, a symphony of English roars, 100 tongues, 1,000 ways. In every accent, history stays. So this stanza really sets the scene across England and beyond. So we're talking from the southwestern cliffs of Cornwall. If you know Cornwall, you'll love it. To the northwestern shores where Geordie, of course Newcastle accents, are spoken. And it very beautifully describes English accents as a symphony. Now a symphony means a beautiful, complex blend of different voices. So really here we're talking about the 100 tongues, 1,000 ways, emphasising the incredible variety of accents that we have here in England. Of course, each one carrying its own historical and cultural background. So really it's saying here that in every accent there's history. In every accent there's background. So that should be appreciated. That should be almost celebrated. Then it goes on to say, the lilt of Devon soft and low, where rolling hills and rivers flow, the clipped tones of the London town, where modern life is bustling down. So here really it's starting off by highlighting the gentle melodic accent of Devon, soft and low, perhaps connected to its peaceful countryside setting. In contrast to London's accents, which is clipped, the clipped tones of London town. Often the London accent is short, it's sharp sounds, and that in turn reflects the fast-paced urban life. So what that city offers is diversity and its energy. Then it talks about a Yorkshire burr, a sturdy sound on fields of green forever bound. The Scottish Highlands wild and free, with Gaelic echoes wild and glee. So this part really celebrates that distinctive Yorkshire burr, a particularly kind of rolling sound grounded in its rural landscapes. And then it moves north to the Scottish Highlands with the accents. I love the way it words it, are kind of wild and free. It's like they're untamed, they're joyful, they're free, and of course they echo the Gaelic language with its rugged and natural beauty. Then it goes on to talk about perhaps how we view them as society. But some would judge, would cast aside the voices shaped by where they hide, a common tongue, a posh facade. When all are equal, none are flawed. So really now this part confronts the prejudice and the social backgrounds or judgment that we might base an accent on. Some people kind of unfairly label certain ways of speaking as common or as posh. But really, it's saying that these judgments, these ways we view British English accents are superficial. It's very judging a book by its cover. Do you know what I mean? All accents in England, they deserve respect because none of them are inherently better or worse, correct, incorrect. They're just what they are. And they come with their own history, with their own background. And that is what truly matters. So the way someone speaks should not give us a judgment about them. And I love this next point. For in each accent, stories hide of ancestors where they did abide, a heritage, a culture's art, a piece of England held to heart. So here, it emphasises that each accent, it carries hidden stories, doesn't it, about people's origins, their families, their histories, where they came from, why they're there, why they speak the way they do. And beautifully so, accents here are described as cultural heritage and art, tied to identity, tied to pride, being proud of the way that they speak. Each accent, each dialect, a treasured piece of England's kind of collective of who we are. So again, it's portraying this idea that neither is right, neither is wrong. It doesn't matter, they're just different. So we kind of get this advice in the last part, listen close, with an open ear, to every voice, so every accent, every dialect, every way of pronouncing a word, both far and near. For in these sounds, a nation lies, reflected in its varied skies. So this final stanza, encourages openness and respect to each form of the English accent. Appreciate every accent, whatever it is, whether it's our preference, whether we like it or not, whether, we prefer a different way of speaking English, each should be respected. This diversity of voice reflects the nation itself. And that is it. And I thought it was just a really nice way of kind of summing up this idea about English accents, which is right, which is wrong. The reality is, it doesn't matter. Now, at this point, it's important to say that we are allowed a preference. Of course, we might find that we do prefer the northern accent. That's absolutely fine. We might think that, I prefer the southern accent, the RP accent. That appeals to me a lot more. Again, it's absolutely fine. But it's just openness to all of them, giving them the respect they earn. And when we think about that idea that it does go back to history, it does go back to cultural backgrounds, that kind of opens the way, doesn't it, for respect of each accent. So there you go. So before we finish, just a little bit of a note here. God, my leg's gone dead. I was sitting on my legs stupidly for the whole recording of this podcast. When you kind of bend your legs up and sit on them. I was doing that, and now my leg is absolutely dead. And now the blood is rushing to my foot, and it feels strange. But that doesn't matter. What was I going to say? Oh, yes. The only thing I would suggest that when learning English, that as regards your pronunciation and your accent, choose a particular accent and way of pronouncing words and stick with it. And I say that because it just makes your journey so much easier. For example, if you have learnt to speak English with the RP accent or more southern pronunciation, you say bath, grass. You don't want to mix that up with grass and bath. That was American. Grass and bath. Yeah, there you go. That'll do. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is, stick with the pronunciation that you're comfortable with, because it makes that whole journey of communication and speaking so much easier. Or sometimes you can end up with this kind of complex accent, which many can't understand. But when it comes to listening, I would try and take in as many forms of the English accent as you can to make your listening skills more rounded, but also just to improve your overall understanding of the English language. It will make it so much easier when you come to England, when you travel around, if you're already kind of a little bit prepared for what you're going to hear. Now, a little bit prepared for understanding and taking in different accents. It will make that process so much easier. So when you're speaking, when you're working on vocabulary and accents, I would focus on one dialect, so that you have continuity in the way that you speak. But when listening, just take it all in. Don't worry about if there's something in a northern accent and you're learning southern English. Don't worry about it. Just take it in. Enjoy it. Embrace it. Really learn to love the differences in the English accent, because that is what makes it so vibrant. If we all spoke the same, the English language or any language would be boring, wouldn't it? But we all have different accents, different pronunciation, and that is absolutely fine. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed that episode today. I very much enjoyed talking about it. If you haven't done so already, please don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to give this episode a like. Say hi in the comments. If you got this far, please let me know in the comments by saying accent. Okay, write accent in the comments if you got this far. And thank you very much for your support as always. All right, have a great week, guys, and I'll see you all soon. Have a good one.